The NAPD room was very default. Table, 2 chairs, and a box to contain them. "Are you okay, Miss Madison?" Oslia was still thinking about her harrowing experience. It seemed like it was still happening around her. She could hear the robot's voice. Anything before that was a lifetime ago, including her last name. It took her a moment to refocus on the officer. He was a gentle-looking man, about her age. "Yeah," she began. "I don't know," she finished truthfully. She instinctively touched her neck where a thick wire had coiled itself less than an hour ago. "Maybe." He nodded. It seemed like more than acknowledgement. "I understand, Miss Madison. You can call me Oslia," she said quickly. He nodded again without skipping a beat. "You've just experienced a Class Alpha 4 anomalous entity. It would be worrying if you weren't shaken by the experience." Oslia thought of the spinning woman she'd seen years ago, and of EC-001 far more recently. They were probably both dangerous in their own way, but neither had threatened her life. She'd been fairly safe until now, she realized. It was scary how quickly that had changed. She would have articulated all of this to the officer, but it wasn't possible to condense raw understanding into a linguistic response. She merely nodded at his statement. There was a lot of that today. "What we can do for you is assure you that the Class Alpha 4 was killed, insofar as we can confirm any anomaly is ever dead." He pushed some papers over from his side of the desk. "These are the energy signatures that spiked at your house during the incident. You can see it's a repeating pattern. We only isolated it in hindsight, but now we can no longer detect this specific repetition anywhere." She stared at the mess of diagrams and numbers. All she could readily conclude was these were very complex somethings, and some of those somethings repeated themselves. "Don't worry if you can't understand it. I barely get it myself. The bottom line is we have evidence it's gone, or changed so much it might as well be. You can keep the papers." His hand tapped them. "Those are your copies?" "Right," she responded. She could tell she was supposed to be receiving information, so she encouraged him to continue what he was already planning to say. "The thing is, we backtraced these results with some of the previous weekly sweeps. The energy readings spiking here," he tapped a part of the chart with today's date, "mirror low-level output that's been happening for several years at the site. Have you noticed anything strange happening in the past year or so? Maybe something abnormal but consistent?" She nodded. There was so much she could have said about sleepless nights and haunted mornings. She opted to condense it down. "I had dreams with the robot. It would hunt me." The officer nodded thoughtfully and wrote something in his notepad. He muttered something to himself. Oslia prompted. "Oh, sorry. I said Pink Universe. There was a case a couple years ago, before I joined on. People in a specific area had dreams of a pink star with an iris. Sometimes they'd be drowning in dark water, or dying of thirst in a desert, or falling into a dead forest, but it was always stressful. Later they'd wake up covered in open wounds. Some of them found notes around the house that seemed like they came from the entity in their dream. We called it the Pink Universe phenomenon." He tapped his pen to his chin and stared into an upper corner of the room. "Point is," he looked back at her, "there are some evils that start small and build up. If you're quick, you can spot the pattern and halt it before it grows into something dangerous." "But not all," she responded, seeing his inevitable conclusion. "Not all." He shook his head, wistful with something known only to him. "Oslia, today we failed to protect you, because at the end of the day, we're all humans. The NAPD is growing daily, but we're racing against something boundless. People like you have faced the enemy and come back from it. We're a bunch of people who do the same." "You want me to join, right?" she blurted. "Well there." The man leaned back and held up his hands. "Well, yeah, I guess I was hinting at it. We both know these days the big jobs are between the Pigeonhole Foundation and the Force. You know the saying, you either work at the complex or the precinct." Oslia did know the saying. It was an exaggeration, but exaggerations need something to distort. On the one hand, she'd never felt like her old job was a drain on her life. On the other hand, she'd never felt the way she did today. Sitting in this room, right here and now, she felt hurt, afraid, but not beaten. There was something underneath the pain and fear. Resolve, an anger, a voice. That voice had been whispering to her for as long as she could remember. It was the voice that told her to do the things she wanted, rather than the things she needed. To hell with the world, it would say. Your life is about you. Her whole existence had been spent compromising with that notion, but now there was a fundamental shift. Oslia could feel that the voice wanted something beyond the cool touch of a water glass or a lazy afternoon on the couch. For the first time in a while, Oslia felt like the things she needed and the things she wanted could be one and the same. When she responded to his offer, that voice spoke with her. The mass of flesh sat putty-like. It would rot someday, but not yet. All of the organisms composing it died in a singular motion, leaving nothing internal to feed on the remains. That would come from external sources, local bacterium, carrion flies, opportunistic ants, NAPD piercer trucks. Each of them would carry pieces away from the great mass until nothing was left. But in this moment, all was peaceful stasis. A hand burst from the fatty surface of the flesh. A face followed, taking in greedy gulps of late afternoon air. All around, other hands and faces were doing the same. The laboured breaths became shouts and answering shouts. Those who dug themselves out turned to help those who had not. Victor emerged like the rest, wet and shaking, but alive. All around him, people rose from the flesh and stared wonderingly at their new surroundings. A few cried, but most did not. It did not seem that anyone was harmed. In fact, the opposite was true. The freshly emerged examined crooked joints that were now straight. They breathed easily through lungs once plagued with pollutants. Their vision was clearer than they'd ever remembered, and the world suddenly seemed so new. They admired with fresh eyes the dizzying heights of their meat platform and the setting sun beyond the city view. Victor patted his abdomen but felt no wound. All of his injuries were sealed up. Even a pain in his back from years of slouched posture was finally gone. Victor was no longer dying. He was the healthiest he'd been in a long time. At first there was silence. Eventually, someone always finds something to say. "I can walk," a woman exclaimed to everyone around. "My legs work." I can hear," a man responded. "Holy shit," a third person chimed in. Victor didn't know what they'd gained. The conversations became more complex, turning from whats into hows and whys. Some chalked it up to a completely random event and thought it was counterintuitive to assign meaning. Victor felt there was a reason, but couldn't discern it. At the end of the day, his knowledge fell as short as the others. Only the cells knew what their reasons were. They took those reasons to the grave. But the people were alive. The people were safe. The people could continue. No matter what the reasons were, they couldn't argue with the results. As they wept with relief or hugged in shared joy or danced with emotions they could not yet categorize, most of them came to the same conclusion. At the end of the day, results were what truly mattered. The sun continued to set, impervious to the world below. Victor and Oslia saw each other several more times in the next few months. Their new lives didn't hold a lot of space for the other, but they made that space count. As a result, they hung out less but grew closer as people. Oslia's job in the NAPD took her to many different locations. She learned about the inner and outer workings of technology that kept civilization alive, the monitoring, maintenance and muscle that went into keeping a community going. She wielded prisma cloud cutters and cyclogenerators, among others, weapons she felt affinity towards because they were made with the intention of killing anomalies and not people. The work was challenging and often dangerous, but it felt right to her. Victor's healed body came with a sudden burst of inspiration. He felt like a new person and owed it to himself to try for a new life. He quit his job, left his home, and searched for change. He found that change in squatter camps at the edges of towns, or the brief communes that would rise and fall as ideas coagulated, grew, and died. Few things in Victor's life were permanent. He didn't mind. He wasn't here for that. He lived to see, feel, and experience. After so long in stagnation, he welcomed those moments in all of their forms. Sometimes his way of life was risky, but it was a risk he chose, and it felt right to him. There would be times Oslia's dreams slipped back into nightmares. Her killer was gone, but her memories carried its legacy. She continued to have visions about the robot. Sometimes it would be in the cave. Sometimes it would be in her home. Sometimes it would reach her. Those nights, Oslia's inner voice would be silent. For an hour afterward, she would lie there and shiver. Over time, the episodes became less frequent. The robot grew slower and she grew faster. One day the balance would complete its shift. It would be weak and she would be strong. She would have the strength to kill her demons soon. She knew that more than anything. There would be times Victor felt funny. His dreams were no longer plagued with anathemic creatures, but his waking life was full of new quirks. Sometimes he felt like a part of himself wasn't his, or was moving in ways he didn't intend. He would have periods of time he felt important organs in his body, his stomach, his spleen, his small intestine, were other creatures symbiotically connected with him. He would fall asleep at night and walk frequently among the red forests, touching the trees at his leisure. Victor never felt like he was losing himself to another force, but had the impression that the force was in him and chose to live with it. One day he would understand that force. One day they might finally understand each other. Both wondered what became of EC-001, or Brian, or whatever it wished to be now. It never returned to the complex. Did it still exist? Did it continue to watch them? Was it learning from them? Neither knew for sure. Occasionally, Oslia would feel a friendly force staring over her shoulder, seeing what she saw. Occasionally, Victor would wander the red forests with a visitor. Both drew their own conclusions from these moments, and both were correct. Elsewhere, thousands of miles away, Peter Pigeonhole spent another early morning poring over research notes and drip measurements. A few yards from Victor's old home, a barber whistled as he cut another head of hair. Across the country, in the quarantine zone of Uncocoy de Braise, soundless things squirmed in a dark, arrhythmic dance. Millions of light years away, two eldritch beings continued to squabble about a misdirected phone signal. Everywhere, something did something. And that was just fine.